ethical introduction of AI in clinical practice. Is there such a thing? Moderated by Michael Tendo, Pearl Data. With Gil Solomon, Gil Solomon & Co. Dr. Jane Thompson, Kasei Holdings. Ilja Radlgruber, Pantaflow Digital Business. And Sophie Smith, Nabta Health.
Yes, glad to be here. So, as we've seen with the recent breakthroughs with AI computational power, we've clearly seen that we have the advancements in hardware and software, and the questions that beg to be answered are whether applying AI is going to bring more good into the world and how we can apply it safely to benefit everyone. So that is why today we're looking at the ethics of the application of AI. And joining me today are a list of experts that will tell us a bit about this issue. And they should go on to introduce themselves.
Thank you, Michael. I'm Ilja Radlgruber, former physician, and run a consultancy for the implementation of AI, and we leverage the work of knowledge workers.
Hi, I'm Jane Thompson. We recently put out a book called Applied Ethics in a Digital World, and there are several chapters on healthcare in that book, and I've also written on health tech, and I was a digital advisor to WHO on their digital health strategy.
My name is Gil Solomon. I'm with Gil Solomon & Co., my law firm. We're based in Israel, working with tech companies, starting from blockchain, where we're ranked among the top in our country, and medical technology as well. When we work with the medical device company, pharmaceutical company, digital health companies, and others. And I'm happy to be here with all of you guys.
Thanks a lot. So we'll start with Dr. Ilja. So our first concern, I'm sure the audience is wondering, if you're going to apply AI to health, this is definitely the most sensitive type of data there is. So are we ready yet in terms of security, and can we trust systems to protect our data?
Yes, that's totally right. It's sensitive data, which means that stating how good AI works is simply not enough. Saying you have an accuracy of 99% won't be enough, because the healthcare insurance company and the hospital who is paying, if a patient has cancer, he wants to understand what is it the benefit the patient will get. So just stating and showing this is accuracy which will occur, and this is the best AI solution is not enough, which means you have to eliminate the black box. And this is a difficult topic, because eliminating the black box means the company which is developing the AI product needs to show their IP and all they produce. On the other side, the doctors, they want to understand the solution before they trust. And I have experienced myself that if the trust is not there, the solution is not adopted. And we see it in healthcare space everywhere. And so this is a topic which is have to be tackled. I think technically speaking, we've come a far way in healthcare. I mean, if you're looking 2016-17, the diagnosing breast cancer, AI was about equaling the bottom 10% of all radiologists, which means the performance was not good. And 2021, a study by Nature was published that AI surpassed human ability by 10%. So we've come really far away. So technically speaking, we are very far, but for trust, you have more things to consider. And one last point I want to say, what I've experienced, and the studies we also conducted, is to get trust, you need to show empathy. A doctor gets trust of the patient if he shows empathy. And if AI can show empathy and emotions, you don't get the trust, and this is a real obstacle for the implementation of AI in healthcare.
Definitely. So I'll turn to Dr. Jane, and we've already explored that with the use of AI, we might have to use robotics in many of the applications, and the human psychology generally around, for example, AI, the other advantage of AI is with psychiatry, with counseling. So humans have a weird psychological connection with AI, and they see it as quote unquote creepy. So there's that problem of trust and feeling comfortable with robots and chatbots. So how do we deal with this? How do we convince humans to feel comfortable around AI, and how do we get over that uncanniness that is embedded intrinsically?
Look, thank you. So I think the first thing is, and we all know that there are risks with the data sets that the AI is being trained on. And are there biases in the data set? Sometimes they're gender biases, sometimes they're racial biases, sometimes the data sets come from a skewed proportion of the population. So first thing is, I'd want to know that the data set that it was being trained on was actually representative of the population, therefore representative of me. The second thing that I'd want to know is that what's happening to my data? So who's using it, for what, where's it being stored, how's it being shared? Do I know if I've given it to the doctor over here that he's not going to on-sell it to someone else? So I think it's trust in the whole system. I don't think it's just trust in AI. And then the other thing is, you know, the GDPR, what if I want my data taken away and not used in this particular AI? So I'd be saying, look, I need to be convinced, I need to trust in this system that you're talking to me about, that I'm going to get a decent deal, that I'm not going to be denied surgery, that my data is going to be kept carefully and securely. So I think they're things that consumers are going to be worried about in terms of AI in healthcare.
Definitely. So the other question that remains is who's going to be responsible? I mean, like legally, since you're a lawyer, you should tell us this. For example, when mistakes are made, who is to blame? For example, currently we have patient-doctor confidentiality, and we know that we can trust that. When there's harm, for example, with AI, actually we can see that the likelihood of harm is multiplied by orders of magnitude. For example, with drug discovery, as an example, it's a positive use of AI, and we can very fast identify drugs for new strains of diseases. But then someone in the audience would wonder, how about if someone is using this maliciously and they're trying to develop chemical weapons? Does that mean that they can build them with that much ease? So with all these risks of harming people and maybe breaching confidentiality, and who are we going to hold responsible legally, and how can we trust the legal system to defend us?
So thank you for the question. First of all, I just want to compliment what Jane said about privacy issues. Privacy issues are the topic, which is a broad topic. And AI, we have to remember, it's still just a software. It's a software that is subject to vulnerabilities like any other software, and it can leak data. So this is one thing that is a vulnerability we need to discuss and trust the system to take care of. A way to take care of that is insurance, as my other colleague to this panel said. Another thing we need to think about is that once an AI reached the clinical phases, it's being used clinically, means that it previously went into clinical trials. And we have a bunch of medical institutions that have approved it through ERBs, which is ethical review boards, and it went through clinical trials with doctors, and it passed actual patients in order to get to the clinical phase, and which means it has already been tested. So in this situation, if there's an issue, it can either be something that is coming probably from reliability issues, which are only mostly, not only, but are mostly discovered in later phases, or prior to that, an issue that comes from malpractice, and this is covered through liability insurance that all hospital and medical clinics have.
Can I just add a comment there, because I think
Surely.
it's important, and that is that traditionally often organisations leave the decisions about key ethical decisions when building AI algorithms and so forth to the Chief Technical Officer or Chief Information Officer. My view is that boards and CEOs need to actually take that responsibility, and they need to be sure that ethical principles are applied at all stages of everything that the organisation's doing. And that should be a board and a CEO responsibility, not for the people who are building it. Because the more distant you are from the build, the kind of less proximate you are and the less you're going to pay attention.
Thanks a lot. So we're joined with Sophie Smith from Nabta Health, and we understand that you're currently actually applying clinical practice, and you'd be best to tell us some of the capabilities that we should expect and maybe the limitations of AI currently in clinical practice.
So I thought the question was really interesting. The ethical introduction of AI into clinical practice, is there such a thing? Because actually, I'd say the introduction of AI to clinical practice actually allows ethical medicine, possibly for the first time ever, because for the first time we can move away from a provider-led, provider-centric model of care to something that is decentralized, that incorporates an augmented intelligence in a way that ultimately benefits the person or the patient. So what we do as Nabta is we've developed a hybrid healthcare model that combines digital and traditional healthcare, including AI, along clinical pathways to materially improve health outcomes for us specifically in women, although the principles of hybrid healthcare are universal. I think there's a bigger underlying question here about ethical practice, which is who does health data belong to? And I'm sorry if I've missed it, I'm sure you've touched on it. For me, it's less about how do we integrate AI and more how do we ensure that with the application of AI and the creation of this augmented intelligence, we give health data back to the individual. We allow them to own it, to hold it, and also to reap the financial benefit of it, which is something that is not done today in any field and by anyone.
That's definitely interesting, because with the computational power of AI, we do not have a computational problem anymore, and we can do drug discovery at a much more accelerated rate. But you find that sometimes these processes are delayed by clinical trials, because clinical trials have to happen in person, right? They have to go and bring the people to the lab and stuff like that. So I've realized that some of this stuff about having the data come to the doctors when the patients are staying there might actually be the only way to go forward with maybe decentralized clinical trials, because clearly the drug discovery process has to happen much more rapidly, because we are living in a world where we are making too many interactions, and there's the rate of mutation of these diseases is just busier than we had been used to before. So you raise a very definitely important point.
So I think that, again, with clinical trials, actually the big issue we have at the moment is the representation of peoples within the data. Today, only 19% of clinical trial participants are women. 92% of clinical trials happen in the US and Europe, with the remaining 8% mostly occurring in the Far East. So actually, Middle Eastern, African, and South Asian populations are almost not represented in clinical trials at all. In fact, they recently found, 23andMe, that they were missing genetic data from 430 million Arabs. So I would say that again, if we're starting to introduce AI into clinical practice more, what are the data sets that are powering that? What was the representation of peoples in clinical trials? How are we training the AI? Are we training it using only the data from white Caucasian men? that's never going to build something that is representative and capable of materially improving health outcomes in populations. How, with the introduction of AI into clinical practice, do we ensure that all of the systemic racial and gender biases that exist in healthcare today are not perpetuated?
And I just want to add to that, if I could, because I think that I want to take up your self-sovereign identity patient record issue. In Kenya right now, there's a program going on that's developed a self-sovereign patient record working with a group of hospitals, Afria Record. I encourage you to have a look at it because it's a really interesting project. And just second on the health data marketplaces, absolutely agree on the biases in the data, but we need to find a way. There are passive data sets sitting everywhere with doctors, with insurers, with radiologists, with GP clinics, and we need to find a way to be able to put them somewhere where people can access them in a secure way for scientific discovery. I mean, that's not going to overcome all of your problem, but it's going to be helpful.
I just want to say something that popped up while you spoke. One way to do it, we actually had a clinical trial approved just yesterday with a company I represent that went to clinical trials with one of the best private hospitals in the world, which is in Israel. And the way we did it is anonymizing the data, because what's important is not the identity, it's not a sales pitch we need to do, is just anonymizing the data, fully anonymizing it, and then it's usable by any other service provider as long as it's really anonymized and there's no way to track back to this data subject.
Yes. Actually, Dr. Jen, you mentioned security, and I would like to get back to Dr. Ilja about that. So we were trying to build a precision health product because we, like I said, we fixed the computational problem. Right now we can discover drugs much faster, and we can actually design a custom drug based on a specific mutation of a specific virus, the mRNA. We give it the drug that is going to reprogram the DNA to produce the antibodies. But with this technology, we realize that we can't use it if we don't have people's data. So we decided to build a product for medical records. And we launched it just yesterday, and it was well received. But then part of the feedback, or most of the feedback, was, are you going to make this decentralized? And I'm curious to find out whether is this the solution to security, right? Is this the only way to make the data secure? Is it going to work? Should this data be decentralized?
I think it's a really tough question because everything you make and develop in the process of AI development is an interdependency to other processes. So making the data transparent is very, very relevant. And what my colleague said about the selection bias, it's a really tough problem. I mean, it was, I think it was Johns Hopkins, it was a study published that women and black people die more often in the intensive care unit. So there's definitely a selection bias. And to give, everybody's talking about autonomous driving and how difficult it is to make an ethical system which decides if you have an old woman and a kid on the street, who should be killed if it's not, can't be avoided, yeah?
The trolley problem.
Yeah, everybody heard about it. But the thing is, in this autonomous driving of the car company, you have the restrictions, the law, how to ride the car on the street, and you have the driver. In the hospital system, you have the patient, you have the developer, you have the hospital buying the system, you have the physician and the nurse. Both of them, the physician and the nurse, they have different laws, how to work, and all of them are interdependent. And to create a system where everybody is satisfied, an AI model, and where you have every transparency, is really difficult. You need the transparency in the sampling, in the selection, and the whole process, how the decision is made. And this is also an important part for trust and security, yeah?
Yeah, but I think, again, I think the only way we'll ever arrive at any kind of truly ethical model of care where the objective is to improve and meet the needs of the person is to have a decentralized system. Because at the moment, every clinic, every hospital in the world where there's some kind of insurance coverage, so they're commercially oriented, will work to attract the footfall of a person, because they understand that when a person walks through those doors, that's when they get paid. And people need to feel the same way about data. They need to understand that data operates a little bit like footfall. And if they don't keep the person, and then they don't get to keep the data either. That at any point, and I know that Georgina, who's the founder of Aria Health, was on the stage earlier talking about their blockchain-based system and how as part of it and as part of the decentralization of data, they're giving people the right to be forgotten. So as an individual, if I don't like what you've done, I can remove your right to access my data. And I think then when the data is the currency of the future, when we can do that, when people feel like in order to maintain access to data, they have to treat the whole person with care, then I think we discover a really interesting model.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you, and I also wish that would come this way. But the thing is, if you want to use an ATM, for example, you come from USA, you're traveling to Australia or to Europe, you can use your ATM card everywhere, but even in US, if you go across the street to the next hospital, your data can't be read.
Exactly. Actually, you can outgrow your doctor and you can't find a new doctor because no one knows your history, right? Like, you have to get them in a meeting and they have to like download all this data from your pediatrician because they can't treat you anymore, and they tell him this person is allergic to penicillin and all that because there's just no system, right? So we tried to fix that, but again, like I told you, there's some ethical and security issues that we're supposed to, and I'm glad today we've addressed the limitations in terms of bias with the clinical trials and decentralization, and then also the data problem, making sure that data is portable and it's secured and people have that trust and they feel comfortable. So just as a conclusion round, I guess we can go around and you tell us what you're excited about most in terms of the AI applications that are yet to come.
I'm looking forward to the regulation which is releasing by the European government, because I think giving more prospect or inspect to the black box and to have the different layers of risk which can happen if you use an AI solution. I think it might be a bit difficult to implement, like the GDPR. It was a good project, but it's difficult to fully implement. But I think this is a good and right way, and I'm looking forward how it will impact further AI development.
Thanks a lot.
I definitely want my self-sovereign health record with all of my health data from everywhere all around the world every time I go to see a doctor.
Then you're going to love mage.health. I think I should show you that product.
My view for the future is specifically with AI and machine learning, we can improve all health services by implementing them further and faster into our lives. And I think that if you educate just as I think it was the previous panel that said, if you educate, no, it was you actually, who said, if you educate the AI well enough, it will be good.
I think the thing I'm most excited about this year is there are some really interesting federated machine learning companies springing up, one from the UK, Bitfount, that will allow, again, a greater degree of data autonomy will allow you to, instead of bringing all the data onto your platform and passing it, send your machine learning algorithms out. And again, it's one of the innovations that will allow for a decentralized model of care where people are willing to implement it.
Exactly, and I'm also very excited about precision health, because I'm yet to see what the drug is going to become, like our whole idea of the pharmacy. And these drugs whose names we know, like we know penicillin, what, and this whole thing changing and to a point where we just like analyze your body and design a custom drug. And I'm thinking it's probably going to be quite exciting if we can iron out all these ethical conundrums. So glad to discuss this with you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.